The snow had turned to slush by midnight, the kind that soaked through my second-hand boots and made every step from the subway to the Altieri feel like a small punishment. I was late, not enough to get fired, but enough that Marco would make me stay an extra hour wiping down the espresso bar. The venue was one of those places where the lighting alone cost more than my rent, all amber and gold, designed to make anyone under six figures feel like they were trespassing. I pushed through the service entrance, letting the heat swallow me. My fingers were numb. I could barely untie my scarf. "Sophia's on floor 3 tonight," Marco said without looking up from his clipboard. He had the kind of face that suggested he enjoyed minor cruelties. "VIP section. Don't speak unless spoken to. Don't linger. Don't make eye contact." I nodded and grabbed my apron. The VIP section meant better tips, theoretically, though it also meant men who looked through you like you were wallpaper. I'd been working at the Altieri for 8 months, long enough to know that invisibility was part of the uniform. Floor 3 smelled like leather and tobacco, even though smoking wasn't allowed. The guests tonight were older, sharper, the kind of men who didn't need to raise their voices to own a room. I moved between tables with my tray, a ghost in black polyester, delivering scotch and sparkling water and tiny plates of food that cost more than my weekly groceries. That's when I saw him. He sat alone near the window, a man in his mid-30s with dark hair swept back and a suit that fit like it had been drawn onto him. He wasn't looking at his phone or pretending to be busy. He was simply there, still in a way that made everyone else seem frantic. When I approached his table, his eyes lifted to meet mine, gray, unreadable, and for a moment I forgot the script Marco had drilled into me. "Good evening," I managed. My voice came out smaller than I wanted. "Whiskey," he said. His accent was local but polished, each word deliberate. "Neat, and take your time." I should have left it there, should have nodded and disappeared. But something in the way he spoke made it feel less like an order and more like he was giving me permission to breathe. I brought the whiskey, he didn't touch it. 20 minutes later, my phone buzzed in my pocket. I ignored it the first time, then the second. By the third, my hands were shaking. I glanced toward the service hall and saw Marco watching me, so I slipped into the narrow corridor near the restrooms and pulled out my phone. Nana's name lit up the screen. I answered in Italian without thinking. "Nana, what's wrong?" Her voice was thin and frightened, words tumbling over each other. The hospital, chest pain, alone. She was alone. I leaned against the wall, my breath catching. "I'll be there in 30 minutes. Don't move, I'm coming." When I turned back toward the floor, he was standing at the end of the hallway. The man from table 12. He didn't move closer, didn't speak. He just stood there, hands in his pockets, expression unreadable. And then he said very quietly, "Nobody moves." It wasn't a threat. It was a command, spoken to someone I couldn't see. A moment later, Marco appeared, looking pale. "You're off the clock," the man said to me, still in that same low, controlled voice. "Your coat." I stared at him. "I don't." "Your grandmother," he said. "The hospital, I heard." My throat closed. "I have to go." "You will." He stepped aside, gesturing toward the service entrance. "My car is waiting." The car was black and enormous, the kind with tinted windows and a driver who didn't make small talk. I should have refused, should have run. But Nana was alone and my checking account had $43 and the next subway wouldn't come for 12 minutes. He sat across from me in the back seat, his long legs angled to one side. The interior smelled like cedar and something darker, something expensive I couldn't name. "Why are you doing this?" I asked. He looked out the window. "You speak Italian." "So?" "Fluently, beautifully." He glanced at me. "That's rare here." I didn't know what to say to that. The silence stretched until we reached the hospital, and when the car stopped, he didn't follow me out. He simply handed me a card, thick, cream-colored, with a phone number embossed in black. "Call me tomorrow," he said. "I have a proposition." I took the card because I didn't know how to refuse a man who just saved me an hour of cold and panic. Then I ran inside, my heart pounding, his gray eyes still burning in my memory. Nana was fine. A false alarm, the nurse said, anxiety, not a heart attack. But when I sat beside her bed and held her papery hand, I couldn't stop thinking about the way he'd stood in that hallway, how the entire building had seemed to obey him without question. By the time I got home, it was past 2 in the morning. I sat on the edge of my bed and stared at the card. The number had no name. I told myself I wouldn't call. I had 3 jobs and a grandmother who needed me and no room in my life for men who moved through the world like they owned the gravity around them. But the next afternoon, Marco fired me. Budget cuts, he said, though we both knew it was because I'd left my section without permission. So I called. He answered on the second ring. I'm glad. Not hello, not who is this, just I'm glad. You said you had a proposition, I said, trying to sound braver than I felt. I need a translator. Italian to English, English to Italian, some French if you have it, 3 weeks, maybe 4. The pay is 15,000. I almost dropped the phone. I started. Non-negotiable, he said. The work is discreet, you'll travel with me, all expenses covered. If you agree, a car will pick you up tonight at 8. Bring a bag. I don't even know your name. There was a pause, then Matteo. Matteo what? Tonight, he said, 8 o'clock. The line went dead. I sat there staring at my phone, my pulse hammering in my ears. $15,000. That was Nana's medical bills. That was 3 months of rent. That was a chance to stop drowning. But it was also a man I didn't know, asking me to disappear into his world. At 7:30, I packed a bag. At 8, the car arrived. Matteo's office was downtown, high enough that I could see the entire city glittering below us. He was waiting when I stepped off the elevator, leaning against a desk of black glass, still in that perfect suit. He didn't smile, but something in his expression softened when he saw me. You came. You're paying me $15,000. I am, he straightened and gestured to a chair. Sit. I sat. He remained standing, which made me feel smaller than I wanted to. Here's what you need to know, he said. I run logistics, import-export acquisitions. Some of my partners prefer to do business in their native languages. You'll accompany me to meetings, dinners, events. You'll translate. You'll be discreet. Discreet, I repeated. What you hear stays between us. No recordings, no notes, no questions. I should have walked out. Every instinct I had screamed that this was dangerous. But I thought of Nana, of the hospital bills stacking up, of the way my landlord looked at me when I was late with rent. What kind of logistics? I asked. He smiled for the first time, and it was not a comforting expression. The kind that keeps cities running. He opened a drawer and pulled out an envelope. Inside was a plain ticket, a credit card with my name on it, and $5,000 in cash. Advance, he said. We leave tomorrow morning, 6 a.m. I stared at the money. Where are we going? Milan. Of course, Milan. I took the envelope. The plane was private. I'd never been on a private plane before. I'd barely been on a plane at all, and the luxury of it made my skin itch. Matteo sat across from me, working on a laptop, his jaw tight with concentration. I tried not to stare at the way his hands moved across the keyboard, efficient and sure. Halfway through the flight, a woman in a crisp uniform brought us lunch. Real plates, real silverware. I ate carefully, aware of every sound I made. You're nervous, Matteo said without looking up. I'm fine. You haven't stopped gripping your napkin for 20 minutes. I set the napkin down, embarrassed. I've never done this before. Translated. Any of this. He closed the laptop and leaned back, studying me with those unreadable gray eyes. You'll be fine. Just listen. Repeat what you hear. Don't interpret unless I ask. And if someone asks who I am, you're my associate. He said it like it was simple, like it didn't matter that I was nobody, that a week ago I'd been invisible. Does that happen a lot? I asked. People asking questions. Yes. What do you tell them? That you're valuable. He stood and moved to the bar at the back of the cabin, pouring himself a drink. Because you are. The way he said it made my chest tighten, not like a compliment, like a fact. We landed at dusk. There was a car waiting, another silent driver. Matteo made 3 phone calls during the drive, all in rapid Italian, his voice low and clipped. I caught fragments, names, numbers, locations, but the context was lost. The hotel was old and beautiful, all marble and frescoes. Our rooms were on the same floor, connected by a shared sitting area that felt more like a museum than a living space. Dinner is at 9, Matteo said, loosening his tie. Wear something formal. There's a wardrobe in your room. I found the wardrobe. Inside were dresses I could never afford, still wrapped in tissue. I chose a simple black sheath and tried not to think about how he'd known my size. When I emerged, he was waiting in the sitting room, now in a different suit, charcoal, with a tie the color of smoke. He looked at me for a long moment, and I felt my face heat. Good, he said quietly, then stay close tonight. The restaurant was the kind of place where everyone knew everyone, where the host greeted Matteo by name and led us to a private corner. There were already 2 men at the table, both older, both watching me with open curiosity. Matteo made introductions in Italian. I smiled and said nothing. The conversation started slow: business, markets, shipping routes. I translated when asked, keeping my voice neutral. But then one of the men leaned forward and said something I wasn't meant to understand, something about Matteo's new acquisition and whether I was part of the package. Matteo's expression didn't change, but his hand, resting on the table, curled into a fist. She's not part of anything, he said in Italian, his voice dropping to something cold and lethal. She's here because she's the best. Disrespect her again and we're finished. The man paled. He apologized. The rest of the dinner was smooth, professional. But under the table, Matteo's knee pressed against mine, a small, deliberate point of contact that felt like both a warning and a promise. When we returned to the hotel, he walked me to my door. You handled that well, he said. I've had worse. He studied me for a moment, something unreadable flickering across his face. Then he reached out and brushed a strand of hair from my cheek, his fingers lingering just a second too long. Good night, Giulia, he said softly. It was the first time he'd used my name. Milan became a blur of meetings and dinners, each one a careful dance of words and silences. I learned to read Matteo's moods by the set of his shoulders, the tightness around his eyes. I learned which silences meant danger and which meant he was simply thinking. On the 4th day, he took me to a private clinic on the outskirts of the city. I didn't understand why until we were inside, and a doctor in a white coat greeted us in German. For your grandmother, Matteo said. Dr. Hoffman is a specialist. He's agreed to consult on her case remotely. If necessary, he'll fly to see her. I stared at him. You can't. I already have. That must cost. It's handled. I wanted to be angry, wanted to tell him he had no right, but all I could feel was the weight of gratitude crushing my chest. Why? I whispered. He looked at me, and for the first time, I saw something raw beneath the control. Because you shouldn't have to choose between keeping her alive and keeping yourself fed. That night I called Nana from my hotel room. She sounded stronger. Dr. Hoffman had already been in touch with her doctors, had adjusted her medication, had arranged for a home care nurse twice a week. This man, Nana said carefully. Matteo, who is he? He's my employer. No, she said. He's more than that. Be careful, Tesoro. Men like him. They give with one hand and take with the other. I thought about that after we hung up. About the dresses in my wardrobe, the car that appeared whenever I needed it, the way Mateo's assistants knew my coffee order before I asked. He was building something around me, a beautiful cage maybe, or a lifeline. I wasn't sure which. The first kiss happened in his study, late on a Friday night. We'd been working through contracts for hours, my eyes burning from the fine print. Mateo had taken off his jacket, rolled up his sleeves, and I tried very hard not to notice the way his forearms looked in the lamplight. "You're distracted," he said, not looking up from his papers. "I'm tired." "Liar." I set down my pen. "Excuse me." He finally looked at me, and there was something almost amused in his expression. "You've been staring at me for the past 10 minutes. My face went hot. "I have not." He stood and crossed the room in 3 strides. I was still sitting, which meant he loomed over me, close enough that I could smell his cologne, cedar and bergamot and something darker. "Tell me to stop," he said quietly. I should have stood up, walked away, remembered every warning Nana had ever given me about powerful men. But I didn't. I just looked up at him, my heart hammering, and whispered, "I can't." He kissed me like he did everything else, with absolute control. His hand cupped my jaw, tilting my face up, and I felt the world narrow to just the two of us, just his mouth on mine, just the sound of my own breath catching. Then I pulled back. "We can't," I said, even though every part of me wanted to lean back in. "Why?" "Because you're paying me, because I gestured helplessly. "This is a job." His jaw tightened. He stepped back, putting careful distance between us. "You're right, I apologize." "Mateo." "Good night, Giulia." He left before I could say anything else. I sat there for a long time, my fingers pressed to my lips, trying to convince myself I'd done the right thing. The next morning he was gone. His assistant, a cold, efficient woman named Francesca, told me he'd flown to Zurich on urgent business. She handed me an envelope with a week's pay in cash and a note in Mateo's precise handwriting. "Take the time. See your grandmother. I'll call when I return." I went home. Nana looked better, her color improved, her breathing easier. Dr. Hoffman's treatment was working. She sat in her chair by the window, the afternoon light turning her white hair gold, and studied me with knowing eyes. "You kissed him," she said. I nearly dropped my tea. "How?" "You have that look, like you've touched something hot and can't decide if you want to let go." I sat down across from her. "It was a mistake." "Was it?" "He's dangerous, Nana." "All men are dangerous, Tesoro. The question is whether they're dangerous to you or dangerous for you." She reached out and took my hand. "Tell me about him." So I did. I told her everything. The car, the plane, the meetings where men spoke in careful code. The way Mateo moved through the world like he owned it. The way he'd arranged her care without asking for anything in return. Nana was quiet for a long time. Then she said, "His last name, what is it?" "I don't know, he never told me." "But you've seen papers, documents." I hesitated. "Santoro, Mateo Santoro." Her face went very still. "Dio mio." "What, do you know him?" "Not him," she said slowly, "but I knew his father, Antonio Santoro." She looked at me, her eyes suddenly sharp. "Giulia, listen to me. That family, they built their fortune on things that don't see daylight. Antonio was a good man in his way, but he made choices that stained everything he touched." "What kind of choices?" "The kind that put food on tables and bodies in the ground." She squeezed my hand. "If Mateo is his son, then you need to be very, very careful." Mateo called 3 days later. His voice on the phone was careful, almost formal. "I'm back. There's a dinner tomorrow night. Milan, private venue. I need you there." "Mateo." "Please," he said, and the single word carried so much weight that I couldn't refuse. The dinner was at a rooftop restaurant, all glass and steel with the city sprawling below us. Matteo was already there when I arrived, standing at the railing, his silhouette sharp against the sunset. "I owe you an apology," he said without turning. "You already apologized." "Not for the kiss, for leaving." He turned to face me. "I needed to think." "About what?" "About whether I'm being fair to you." He stepped closer but kept his distance, respectful. "This world I live in, it's not kind. And the more time you spend in it, the more it marks you. I don't want that for you." "That's not your choice to make." "Isn't it? I brought you here. I put you in these rooms, these situations. I made you visible." His voice dropped. "And visibility in my world is the most dangerous thing I can give you." "Then send me home." "I can't." "Why not?" He looked at me for a long moment, and I saw something break behind his eyes. "Because you're the first real thing I've touched in 10 years. The words hung between us, raw and true. I wanted to go to him to close the distance, but something held me back. Maybe Nana's warning, maybe my own fear. "The dinner," I said finally. "Who are we meeting?" His expression shuddered. "A competitor, someone who wants what I have." "And what's that?" "Control." He straightened his cuffs. "Stay close tonight. Translate only what I ask. And if anything feels wrong, you leave. Francesca will be waiting with a car." "Matteo." "Promise me." I promised. The competitor's name was Luca Morti, and he was younger than I expected, maybe 40, with the kind of smile that didn't reach his eyes. He greeted Matteo like an old friend, but I could feel the tension between them, sharp as wire. We sat, ordered wine, made small talk in Italian that I translated into English for the American associate Morty had brought, a thin man with nervous hands who watched everything like he was taking notes. Then Morty leaned forward and said, in Italian, "I hear you've brought new blood into the organization. A translator, how? Quaint." Matteo's expression didn't change. "Giulia is an asset, that's all you need to know." "An asset?" Morty's gaze slid to me, assessing. "She's very beautiful. I can see why you'd want to keep her close." Under the table, Matteo's hand found my knee, a warning. "Stick to business, Luca." "Of course," Morty smiled. "Business. Let's talk about the eastern routes. I've heard you're having trouble with customs." "Nothing I can't handle." "Are you sure? Because I've also heard," he paused, his smile widening. "I've heard the authorities are asking questions about your shipments, about your accounting." The temperature in the room seemed to drop. Matteo's hand on my knee tightened, then released. "Careful," Matteo said softly. "I'm just saying," Morty continued, "that if you're having difficulty maintaining your operation, perhaps it's time to consider a partnership, a merger of interests." "I don't need a partner." "Everyone needs a partner eventually, especially when the walls start closing in." I translated for the American, keeping my voice neutral, but my pulse was racing. This wasn't a negotiation. It was a threat. Matteo stood. "We're done here." "Are we?" Morty didn't stand. "Think about my offer, Centauro. You have a week. After that," he spread his hands, "after that, I can't guarantee your position will remain secure." We left. Matteo's hand at the small of my back was firm, possessive, guiding me through the restaurant and into the waiting car. He didn't speak until we were moving, the city lights blurring past the windows. "He's going to move against me," Matteo said quietly. "How do you know?" "Because it's what I would do." He looked at me and his eyes were storm gray. "Morty has contacts in the financial police. He'll manufacture a crisis, trigger an investigation. It's cleaner than violence, more effective." "Can you stop him?" "Yes, but it will require—" He stopped himself. "It will require getting you and your grandmother somewhere safe first." My chest tightened. "Matteo, I can take care of." "No," he said, and there was something almost desperate in his voice. "You can't. Not from him. Morty doesn't have rules. If he thinks you're important to me, he'll use you. So what do we do? He pulled out his phone and made a call, speaking rapid Italian. When he hung up, he took my hand, lacing our fingers together. "Pack your things," he said. "We're leaving Milan tonight." The safe house was in the Alps, a villa carved into the mountainside with views that would have been breathtaking if I weren't so terrified. Matteo had arranged everything: transportation for Nana, a private medical suite, round-the-clock security. She arrived the next morning, confused but unharmed, and when she saw Matteo, something strange passed over her face. "You look just like him," she said in Italian. Matteo went very still. "Like who?" "Your father, Antonio. I knew him many years ago." I looked between them. "Nana, what are you talking about?" She sat down slowly, her hands trembling. "My husband, your grandfather, he worked for the Santoro family. As an accountant, he kept their books, made sure the numbers stayed clean." She looked at Matteo. "Antonio trusted him. And when things went wrong, when the authorities came, Antonio protected us. He could have thrown your grandfather to the wolves, but he didn't." Matteo's jaw was tight. "I didn't know." "Why would you? You were just a boy." Nana reached out and touched his hand. "But that debt, it never went away. I always wondered if someday I'd have to repay it." "This isn't about debt," Matteo said. "Isn't it?" Nana smiled sadly. "You've done all this for Giulia. The doctor, the safety. You think I don't know what that costs? You're repaying your father's kindness, making the books balance." "No," his voice was firm. "I'm not doing this out of obligation." "Then why?" He looked at me, and the vulnerability in his expression made my breath catch. "Because she matters." That night I found him on the terrace, staring out at the snow-covered peaks. The air was cold and thin, and I wrapped my coat tighter as I joined him. "Your grandmother's right," he said without looking at me. "I am my father's son. Everything I've built, every choice I've made, it's all in his shadow." "That doesn't mean you're the same as him." "Doesn't it? I run the same routes, use the same methods, I just have better lawyers." He turned to face me. "I told you before that you're my weakness. That's not fair to you. You deserve better than being someone's vulnerability." "Maybe I don't want better. Maybe I just want you." The words came out before I could stop them, raw and true. Matteo stared at me, and I saw the control he wore like armor crack just a little. "You don't know what you're saying." "Yes, I do. I know exactly what I'm saying." I stepped closer. "I know you're dangerous. I know this world is dangerous. But I also know that you've taken care of me and my grandmother, that you've been kinder than anyone I've ever met, and that when you kissed me, I didn't want you to stop." "Giulia." "I'm not asking for promises. I'm not asking for forever. I'm just asking you to stop trying to protect me from yourself." He reached out and cupped my face, his thumb tracing my cheekbone. "If I let you in, if I let this happen, there's no going back. You'll be part of this, part of me." "I know. And if Morty comes for me, he'll come for you too. Then we'll deal with him together." He kissed me then, and it was nothing like the first time. It was desperate and hungry and full of all the things we couldn't say. His hands tangled in my hair, and I pressed against him, feeling the hard lines of his body, the heat of him even in the cold mountain air. When we finally broke apart, we were both breathing hard. "I need to show you something," he said. He led me inside, down a corridor I hadn't explored, to a study lined with leather-bound books in dark wood. He unlocked a cabinet and pulled out a ledger, old, worn, filled with columns of numbers in fading ink. "This was your grandfather's work," he said, setting it on the desk. "My father kept it. After he died, it came to me." I opened it carefully. The entries went back decades, recording transactions that I didn't fully understand. But on the last page in different ink was a single entry: "Antonio Santoro, debt paid in full. May your son find light where I found shadow." My throat tightened. My grandfather wrote this. The day before he died. Matteo's voice was soft. He must have known I'd see it eventually, that I'd understand. Understand what? That debt isn't always about money. Sometimes it's about mercy, about choosing who to protect and who to sacrifice. He looked at me. My father chose to protect your family, and now I'm choosing to protect you, not because I owe anyone, but because when I look at you, I see a future that isn't built on shadows. I closed the ledger and turned to face him. What happens now? Now we end this. Morty wants my territory, my connections. He thinks he can pressure me into surrender. Mateo's expression hardened. He's wrong. How do you stop him? Carefully, legally if possible. I've spent years building legitimate fronts, real estate, shipping, tech investments. Morty's operation is still dirty. If I can expose him to the right authorities, he'll go down without me having to touch him. And if that doesn't work, then I call in every favor I'm owed and make sure he understands that some wars aren't worth winning. He pulled me close, resting his forehead against mine. I need you to trust me. Can you do that? I thought about Nana's warning, about the ledger, about all the ways this could go wrong. Then I thought about the way he'd looked at me on the terrace, like I was something precious and fragile and worth protecting. Yes, I whispered, I trust you. The next week was a blur of phone calls and meetings, Mateo working with lawyers and accountants to build a case against Morty. I helped where I could, translating documents, sitting in on conference calls. But mostly I watched Mateo transform from the controlled, careful man I'd first met into something sharper, more focused, a weapon pointed at a single target. Nana grew stronger. Dr. Hoffman visited twice, adjusting her treatment, and she spent her afternoons on the villa's sunlit patio, wrapped in blankets, watching the mountains. Sometimes Mateo would sit with her, the two of them speaking quietly in Italian, and I'd watch from inside, wondering what they talked about. One evening she called me over. He told me he loves you, she said without preamble. I nearly dropped my coffee. He what? Not in those words, but it's there in everything he does, the way he looks at you, the way he says your name, she smiled. He's terrified, Tesoro. Men like him, they're not used to feeling anything real. It's easier for them to move money and people than to admit they have a heart. I don't know if love is the right word for this. Then what is? I thought about it, partnership, respect, need. That's just love wearing different clothes. Nana reached out and squeezed my hand. Don't let fear stop you from taking what you want. I did that once with your grandfather. Spent 2 years pushing him away because I was afraid of being hurt. Those 2 years, I'll never get them back. But Mateo's world is dangerous, yes, so is crossing the street, so is falling in love. You can spend your whole life trying to stay safe, or you can live. She looked at me, her eyes fierce despite her frailty. Choose life, Giulia. Morty made his move on a Tuesday night. I was in the study, working through a contract translation, when Mateo burst in, his face tight with controlled fury. He filed charges, Mateo said. Anonymous tip to the financial police, claiming I've been laundering money through my real estate holdings. They've frozen 3 of my accounts and issued a warrant. My stomach dropped. Can they prove it? No, because it's not true, but that's not the point. The point is that Morty's forcing my hand. He wants me to retaliate publicly to make a mistake. So what do? We don't do anything. I handle this. He crossed to the cabinet and pulled out a laptop, his fingers flying over the keys. I've been tracking Morty's operation for weeks. His shipments, his contacts, his financial networks. He thinks he's untouchable because he's diversified, but everyone has a weak point. What's his? Arrogance. He's been using his nephew's company as a front to move goods through customs. The nephew doesn't know what he's transporting, which makes him an innocent party. If I feed that information to the right investigator, someone who's been trying to build a case against Morty for years, the whole operation collapses. And the charges against you. will disappear once Morty is busy defending himself. Matteo looked up at me. It's not violence, it's just chess. You're sure this will work? No, but it's the best option we have. He made the call that night, speaking to someone in rapid, clipped Italian. I heard names, dates, locations. When he hung up, he looked exhausted. It's done, he said. Now we wait. The waiting was worse than the action. 3 days passed with no news, and Matteo grew tenser with each hour, packing the villa like a caged animal. I tried to distract him with work, with food, with conversation, but nothing helped. On the 4th day, Francesca called. I watched Matteo's face as he listened, saw the moment the tension drained from his shoulders. It's over, he said when he hung up. Morty's been arrested. Wire fraud, money laundering, tax evasion. They found everything, and the charges against me have been dropped. I let out a breath I didn't know I'd been holding. So we're safe. For now. He crossed to me and pulled me into his arms, holding me tight. His organization will fracture without him. Some of his people will try to retaliate, but they'll be too busy fighting each other to worry about me. And you, what happens to your operation? I shut it down. The parts that can't see daylight, I liquidate them, transfer everything to legitimate ventures. He pulled back to look at me. I meant what I said. I want a future that isn't built on shadows. That starts with cleaning house. That's going to cost you. I know, but you're worth it. The simplicity of the statement made my chest ache. I reached up and kissed him, soft and slow, and felt him relax against me. What now? I whispered against his mouth. Now we build something real. Nana passed 3 months later in her sleep with me holding her hand. It was peaceful as death can be, and I was grateful for that. Grateful that she'd had those last months in comfort, surrounded by beauty, with Dr. Hoffman's care making every day a little easier. Matteo arranged the funeral, a small service in a chapel overlooking the mountains, with flowers and music and a priest who spoke of mercy and grace. Afterward, we scattered her ashes in the villa's garden, and I cried until I had nothing left. She loved you, Matteo said that night, his arm around my shoulders as we sat on the terrace. She told me that last week, said I'd better take care of you or she'd haunt me. I laughed through my tears. That sounds like her. She also said, he paused. She said her biggest regret was not taking more risks, not saying yes to the things that scared her. She told me the same thing. Then we should listen to her. He turned to face me, taking both my hands in his. Marry me. I stared at him. What? I know it's fast. I know we've only known each other a few months. But I also know that every morning I wake up and the first thing I think about is you. Every decision I make, I ask myself if it's something you'd respect. You've made me want to be better than I am. His voice dropped. Marry me. Build this future with me. Let me spend the rest of my life proving that I can be worthy of you. I should have hesitated, should have asked for time to think, but Nana's voice was in my head, choose life, and I knew with absolute certainty what I wanted. Yes, I said. He kissed me then, and it tasted like salt and promise. The house we built was nothing like the villa. It was smaller, warmer, filled with books and light and the smell of coffee in the morning. Matteo had kept his word. The old operation was gone, replaced by a real estate empire that operated in full daylight. He still worked long hours, still had that edge of controlled intensity, but now he came home at night and told me about his day. I finished my degree, opened a translation service, started teaching Italian to immigrant kids at the community center. Small things, but they were mine. On our anniversary, Matteo took me back to the Alps. We stood on the terrace of the villa, now converted into a boutique hotel, and looked out at the mountains. Do you ever regret it? He asked, saying yes. I thought about the waitress I'd been, invisible and drowning, answering a phone call in Italian without knowing it would change everything. Thought about the fear and the danger, and the way Nana had smiled when I told her I was getting married. "No," I said, "not for a second." He pulled me close, his hand at the small of my back, protective, possessive home. And as the sun set over the peaks, turning the snow to gold, I thought about temperature and jewelry and doors that open. About how sometimes the most dangerous choice is also the right one. About how love, in the end, is just another word for choosing someone every single day, even when it scares you. Especially when it scares you. "I love you," Mateo whispered against my hair. And I whispered back, "I know." Because I did. Because he'd shown me, in 1,000 small ways, that love wasn't about possession or debt or beautiful cages. It was about standing next to someone and saying, "Here, this is who I am. This is what I can give. Will you stay?" The hotel manager recognized us immediately, greeting Mateo with the kind of deference reserved for investors who transformed a private villa into their flagship property. We declined the offer of champagne and walked the grounds instead, my hand in his, retracing the paths where I'd once paced in fear. "Do you remember the first night here?" I asked, "when you told me Morty was coming for you?" "I remember thinking I'd made a terrible mistake bringing you into this, that I should have sent you away the moment I realized what you meant to me. And now—" He stopped walking and turned to face me, the late afternoon sun catching the silver at his temples. 3 years had added lines around his eyes, a gravitas to his presence that made him somehow more attractive than the dangerous man I'd first met. "Now I know that sending you away would have been the real mistake. You didn't just save me from Morty. You saved me from becoming my father." We continued walking until we reached the garden where we'd scattered Nana's ashes. Someone had planted roses there, deep red ones that bloomed even in the mountain cold. A small plaque had been installed, discreet but permanent. "In memory of Elena Russo, she chose life." I knelt and touched the earth, feeling the familiar ache of loss tempered by time. She would have loved seeing what we built. She did see it, in her way. Mateo crouched beside me. "That last conversation we had before she died, she told me that the best way to honor a debt wasn't to repay it but to pass it forward, to give someone else the chance she was given." "Is that why you started the scholarship fund?" "Partly, but mostly because you suggested it." He smiled. "You have a way of making me want to be better than I planned to be." We stayed there until the sun began to set, then returned to the hotel. Our room overlooked the valley, and I stood at the window watching the lights come on in the distant villages, while Mateo made phone calls in the sitting area, always working, even on our anniversary. When he finally hung up, he came to stand behind me, his arms circling my waist. "That was Francesca," he said. "The Bergamo property closed today. We're officially the largest private real estate holder in northern Italy." "Congratulations." "It means I can slow down, delegate more, spend more time," he paused, "spend more time on other things." I turned in his arms. "What other things?" "Things we've been too busy to talk about. Like the fact that this house of ours, it's very quiet." My heart skipped. "Mateo, I'm not pressuring you. I just want you to know that if we wanted, I'm ready, for whatever comes next." I'd been thinking about it too, of course. Late at night when he was traveling and the house felt too empty. During my classes when I watched the children struggle with their English and remembered what it felt like to be lost between languages, between worlds. "I'm scared," I admitted. "Of what?" "Of bringing a child into this. Your past, our past. What if it comes back? What if someone tries to use them the way Morty tried to use me?" "That's not going to happen. The organization is gone. The people who knew what I was, they've moved on or been buried by their own choices. We're clean now, Giulia, truly clean." "Are we, or are we just better at hiding?" He was quiet for a moment, and I felt him considering the question with the same careful precision he brought to every decision. "Come with me tomorrow," he said finally. "There's someone I want you to meet." We drove to Milan in the morning, through countryside still green despite the approaching autumn. Matteo was quiet during the drive, his jaw set in that way that meant he was working through something difficult. The address he gave the driver was in an old neighborhood, the kind where buildings leaned against each other like tired friends. We stopped in front of a modest apartment building, and Matteo helped me out of the car. "Who lives here?" I asked. "My mother." I stared at him. In 3 years of marriage, he'd never mentioned his mother. I'd assumed she was dead. He saw my expression and gave a rueful smile. "I know, I should have told you, it's complicated." "Everything with you is complicated." "Fair." He took my hand. "She left when I was 16. Couldn't live with what my father was, what she knew I was becoming. I didn't speak to her for 20 years. And then, after you and I got married, I tracked her down, sent her a letter, told her I was trying to be different." "What did she say?" "She asked to meet you." The apartment was small but immaculate, filled with plants and afternoon light. The woman who opened the door was in her 70s, elegant in a faded way, with Matteo's gray eyes and sharp cheekbones. "Mama," Matteo said, and I heard something in his voice I'd never heard before, uncertainty. She looked at him for a long moment, then pulled him into an embrace. When they separated, her eyes were wet. "You look so much like him," she whispered. "But your eyes, they're softer, less haunted." She turned to me. "You must be Giulia. Come in, please." We sat in her small living room, drinking coffee she'd prepared, while she asked me questions about my work, my family, my life with her son. Matteo sat quietly, watching us both with an expression I couldn't quite read. Finally, she set down her cup and looked at him directly. "You want to know if you're safe, if the poison of that life can be washed away." Matteo nodded. "The truth, I don't know. Your father tried at the end, tried to build something legitimate to create distance between the family and the violence, but it was too late. The stain was too deep." She reached across and took his hand. "But you started earlier. You got out while you could still see the line between right and wrong, and you found someone who won't let you forget where that line is." She looked at me when she said this, and I felt the weight of her trust settle on my shoulders. "I left because I couldn't watch Antonio destroy himself," she continued. "And I couldn't watch him destroy you, but I've kept track of you all these years. I know what you built. I know how you dismantled it. I know about the scholarships, the legal work, the housing projects for immigrants." Her voice softened. "You're not your father, Matteo. You're better than he ever had the chance to be." Matteo's eyes were bright. "How can you be sure?" "Because you're here. Because you brought your wife to meet the mother you thought had abandoned you. Because you're asking permission to move forward instead of just taking what you want." She squeezed his hand. "That's not Antonio, that's you." We left an hour later, both of us quiet. Matteo held my hand as we walked back to the car, his grip tight. "Thank you," he said finally. "For what?" "For not asking why I kept her secret, for just being here. She's right, you know, you're not your father. But I was for a long time, and that version of me still exists, in the memories of people I hurt, in the consequences of choices I made." He stopped walking and turned to face me. "If we have a child, when we have a child, I need you to promise me something." "What?" "That you'll tell them the truth. Not the sanitized version, not the story we tell at parties. The real truth about who I was and what I did. Because they deserve to know what they're inheriting." "Matteo." "I'm serious. I won't have them discover it some other way, from some enemy I didn't know I still had. They need to hear it from us. From you." I thought about Nana, about the ledger, about all the secrets that had shaped our lives. "Okay," I said, "I promise, but you have to promise me something too." "Anything." "That you'll tell them about the good parts, about your mother, about how you changed, about the fact that people aren't just the worst thing they've ever done." He pulled me close, resting his forehead against mine. "Deal." 6 months later, I found out I was pregnant. The test sat on the bathroom counter, those two pink lines clear and undeniable. I stared at it for a long time, feeling fear and joy and something else, something like inevitability. When Mateo came home that night, I was in the kitchen, supposedly making dinner but mostly just standing there looking at vegetables I'd forgotten to chop. "Giulia," he set down his briefcase. "What's wrong?" I handed him the test. I watched his face transform, shock, then wonder, then a smile so wide and genuine that it took years off him. "We're having a baby," he said, like he needed to hear it out loud to believe it. "We're having a baby." He lifted me off my feet, spinning me in the kitchen, laughing in a way I'd only heard a handful of times. When he set me down, his eyes were wet. "I'm terrified," he admitted. "Me too. But we're doing this." "Yes, we're doing this." He knelt down right there in the kitchen and pressed his forehead to my still flat stomach. "Hello," he whispered. "I'm your father, and I promise, I'm going to do better by you than anyone did by me." The pregnancy was smooth until it wasn't. At 7 months, I started having contractions too early, and suddenly we were in the hospital, machines beeping, doctors speaking in urgent tones. Mateo didn't leave my side. He held my hand through every test, every injection, every terrifying hour of waiting. When the doctors finally stabilized me and said the baby would be fine, that we just needed to be careful, he slept in the chair beside my bed, his hand never leaving mine. "You're going to be an excellent father," I told him in the quiet of that hospital room. "How do you know?" "Because you're already protecting someone who doesn't even exist yet. Imagine what you'll do when they're actually here." He smiled, but it was edged with worry. "What if I can't do this? What if I'm too damaged?" "Then we'll be damaged together, and we'll love them anyway. That's all anyone can do." 2 months later, on a cold morning in February, our daughter was born. She came out screaming, red-faced and furious, with a shock of dark hair and her father's gray eyes. Mateo held her like she was made of glass, his large hands impossibly gentle, and I watched him fall completely, irreversibly in love. "What should we name her?" he asked, not taking his eyes off her face. "I've been thinking about this for months. Elena, after my grandmother." His voice was rough. "She would have loved that." "I know." We brought Elena home to a house we'd baby-proofed within an inch of its life, and suddenly, our quiet existence was filled with crying and feeding, and the thousand small panics of new parenthood. Mateo threw himself into it with the same intensity he brought to everything, reading books on infant development, installing state-of-the-art monitors, hovering over her crib like she might disappear if he looked away. "You need to sleep," I told him one night, finding him in the nursery at 3 a.m. just watching her breathe. "I know, He reached into the crib and adjusted her blanket, even though it was already perfect. "I keep thinking about all the ways this could go wrong, all the things I can't control." "That's parenthood, that's just what this is." "How do you stay so calm?" "I'm not calm, I'm terrified, but I'm also too tired to panic properly." I moved to stand beside him, our daughter sleeping peacefully between us. "She's going to be fine, Mateo. We're going to be fine. You're allowed to just enjoy this." He looked at me and some of the tension left his shoulders. "I'm trying." "I know you are." Elena grew. Months became a year, then 2. She learned to walk, to talk, to wrap her father around her tiny finger with a single smile. Mateo was, against all odds, a natural parent, patient, attentive, willing to spend hours on the floor building block towers just to watch her knock them down. But I could see the question forming in his mind, the one he'd been carrying since before she was born. When do we tell her? It came to a head on Elena's 3rd birthday, at a party filled with children from her preschool and their parents. One of the mothers, a woman I'd never liked, with sharp eyes and a sharper tongue, cornered me by the cake table. Your husband, she said with false casualness. What did you say he does? Real estate development. I thought I recognized his name. From the news years ago, something about an investigation. My blood went cold. That was a long time ago. The charges were dropped. Oh, I know. I'm sure it was all a misunderstanding. She smiled, showing too many teeth. It's just interesting, isn't it? The way some people manage to escape their past. I wanted to throw the cake at her. Instead, I smiled back. Alina's looking for you. She wanted to show you something. Who? Your daughter, the one who's currently eating frosting directly from the bowl. She fled, and I stood there shaking, watching Mateo across the yard as he lifted Alina onto his shoulders, her delighted laughter ringing out. That night, after everyone had left and Alina was asleep, I told him what the woman had said. His expression went flat. I'll handle it. How? I'll talk to her husband. He works in finance. I know people he works with. I'll make it clear that spreading rumors about my family isn't in anyone's best interest. Mateo, no. That's exactly what we're trying to avoid. Using your old connections, making threats. I'm not threatening anyone. I'm just going to have a conversation. That's how it starts. I moved to stand in front of him, forcing him to look at me. This is what I was afraid of, that you'd slip back into those patterns the moment someone challenged you. She insulted you, implied that I'm some kind of criminal. You were a criminal. The words hung in the air between us, sharp and undeniable. His jaw tightened. I know that. Do you? Because right now you sound like you're ready to make her husband's life hell just because she was rude at a birthday party. It wasn't just rude, it was a threat. She was saying she could expose me. So let her tell whoever she wants. We have nothing to hide anymore. You've been clean for 5 years. You've built a legitimate business. You're a good father and a good husband. If she wants to drag up old investigations that went nowhere, let her. The truth will speak for itself. He stared at me, and I watched him fight with himself. The old Mateo, who solved problems with leverage and power, warring with the new one, who was trying to solve them with integrity. Finally he exhaled, "You're right. I know I am. When someone threatens what I love, my instinct is to burn them down. I know, but you can't. Not anymore. Not if you want Alina to grow up believing that there are better ways to solve problems." He pulled me close, and I felt him trembling slightly. This is harder than I thought it would be. Being good. Being different. Every day I have to choose it, and some days I'm not sure I'm strong enough. That's why you have me, to remind you when you forget. We made it through that crisis, made it through several others over the years as Alina grew and started asking harder questions. Where did Daddy work before? Why don't we see Grandpa? What does laundering mean? We told her the truth in age-appropriate pieces, that her father had made mistakes when he was younger, that he'd worked for bad people and done things he wasn't proud of, that he'd changed, but that change was hard and ongoing. She took it better than we expected, maybe because she'd never known the old Mateo, the dangerous one. To her, he was just Dad, the one who read her stories in Italian, who taught her chess and never let her win, who showed up to every recital and parent-teacher conference no matter how busy he was. On her 10th birthday, she asked if she could see the ledger. Mateo and I exchanged glances. We'd told her about her great-grandfather and the debt, and the strange way our family histories had intertwined, but we'd never shown her the actual book. "Are you sure?" Mateo asked. "I want to understand where I come from, all of it." So he brought out the ledger, that old leather-bound book with its columns of numbers and secrets. Alina read through it carefully, her young face serious, tracing the entries with her finger. When she reached the last page, her great-grandfather's final entry, she read it aloud. "May your son find light where I found shadow." She looked up at us. "Did you find light?" Mateo's eyes met mine across our daughter's head. I'm trying, every day. I think you did, Alina said simply. Otherwise I wouldn't be here. Out of the mouths of babes. Years continued to pass. Alina grew into a teenager, smart and sharp-tongued, equally comfortable in Italian and English, with a sense of justice that occasionally terrified me. She wanted to be a lawyer, she announced at 14, wanted to help people who got trapped in systems they didn't understand. Like Mom was, she said, before she met you. Mateo had smiled at that, proud and pained in equal measure. His mother died when Alina was 15, peacefully in her sleep. We buried her in the same mountain garden where we'd scattered Nana's ashes, and Alina read a poem in Italian that she'd written herself. Afterward, Mateo stood at the edge of the garden for a long time, and I stood beside him, saying nothing. Sometimes silence was the greatest comfort I could offer. She forgave me, he said finally. At the end, I never thought she would. She forgave you a long time ago. She just needed you to forgive yourself first. Have I? I considered this. I think you're getting there. On our 15th anniversary, we returned to the Alps again. Alina came with us this time, a young woman now, tall and graceful, with her father's eyes and my grandmother's fierce spirit. We stood on the same terrace where Mateo had proposed, where I'd said yes to a future I couldn't see clearly but wanted desperately. Tell me the story again, Alina said, about how you met. You've heard it 100 times, I protested. I know, but I like it. So I told her about the cold night and the upscale venue and the phone call in Italian that had changed everything. About her father standing in that hallway, saying, "Nobody moves," in a voice that made the world obey. It sounds like a movie, Alina said. It felt like one too, like something that couldn't possibly be real. But it was real, Mateo said. The most real thing that ever happened to me. Alina looked out at the mountains, at the snow that had started falling softly in the twilight. Do you think you would have found each other anyway? If not that night, then some other way. I don't know, I admitted. Maybe. Or maybe we would have just been two people who passed in the street and never knew what we'd missed. I think you would have found each other, Alina said with the certainty of youth. Some people are just meant to collide. We stayed on the terrace until the cold drove us inside, and later, in the warmth of the hotel room, Mateo pulled me close. No regrets, he asked. It was a question he'd asked before, but this time it felt different, lighter. None, I said, and I meant it. Because yes, the path had been dangerous. Yes, there had been moments of terror and doubt. Yes, I'd married a man with shadows in his past and spent years helping him step into the light. But we'd built something real, a family, a life, a love that was tested and refined and ultimately unbreakable. And if I had to go back and choose again, standing in that hallway with my phone in my hand, watching a dangerous stranger who'd heard me speak Italian and decided I was worth saving, I'd choose the same way. Every single time. I'd choose the storm. I'd choose the risk. I'd choose him. Because some collisions aren't accidents. Some are simply inevitable. And ours, mine and Mateo's, was written in the stars and the snow, in old ledgers and new promises, in the space between who we were and who we were brave enough to become.